Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The brilliant orange star burned mercilessly over the rusted roofs of the Wayland Corporation complex. The superheated air shimmered above the metal, distorting the outline of the giant quarry gouged into the body of planet Zyterra. Dust, fine as flour, hung in the air, coating everything in a thin layer of ochre. It grated between the teeth and clogged the lungs. Jake Rowan tightened the last bolt on the hydraulic pump and straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. His coveralls, once gray, were now the same color as the local landscape. At 35, he was just a mechanic, broad-shouldered with calloused hands, used to fixing what others broke. He wasn't a soldier or a hero. He was a man who wanted one thing: to finish this damn contract and get off the planet the gods had forgotten right after creating it. 11 months, 3 weeks, and 5 days, he muttered, checking the calibration gauge. Another 63 days, and I'll have enough credits for that decommissioned Starlight Corsair. His fingers moved automatically over the machinery, while his mind drifted to the small vessel he'd been eyeing. His ticket to freedom, to the outer rim where corporations couldn't reach, where memories couldn't follow. His hands tensed involuntarily, knuckles whitening as phantom sounds of plasma fire echoed in his mind. 7 years since Ganymede 7, and still the nightmares came. Still he woke in the darkness, drenched in sweat, hearing the screams of colonists caught in the crossfire between corporate security and insurgents who had merely wanted fair water rights. Jake had been a different man then, Lieutenant Rowan of Alliance Peacekeeping, until he'd seen what peacekeeping really meant in corporate territory, until he'd put down his weapon, torn off his insignia, and walked away to become a man who fixed things instead of breaking them. "Piece of junk," he muttered, kicking the newly repaired pump gently. The machine responded with a low, steady hum, a good sign, but Jake knew better than to trust machinery on Zyterra. The planet's fine dust found its way into everything, grinding gears and clogging filters with malicious efficiency. Beyond the rusty chain-link fence began the settlement of the Shen clan. Their dwellings, carved from bone and stone, seemed an organic extension of the planet, a living reproach to the utilitarian geometry of the corporate complex. In the center of the settlement was a well, almost dry, once a source of life, and now a source of conflict. Shen warriors, tall, with sapphire-colored skin and silver hair, watched him in silence. Their gazes were as heavy as stones. Jake felt their eyes on his back as he packed his tools. He'd been on Zyterra for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days, not that he was counting, and still hadn't gotten used to the weight of those stairs. The Shen were not hostile exactly, but their quiet dignity made Jake deeply aware of his status as an interloper. A shout from the direction of the complex gate drew his attention. Jake squinted against the harsh light. The station chief, Henderson, a cynical bureaucrat with soft hands and a hard smile, was meeting with someone at the gate. Even from a distance, Jake could see it was the Shen clan elder, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, sapphire skin wrinkled by age and hardship. Jake caught Henderson's voice before he reached the gate, the administrator growling into his comm unit. "I don't care about the atmospheric interference. You tell Central that if they want their shipment, they need to—" He stopped abruptly, noticing Jake's approach, and snapped the device shut. Henderson's eyes were bloodshot, his normally pristine uniform showing uncharacteristic wrinkles. Corporate had been increasing pressure lately, demanding higher extraction quotas despite dwindling resources. "I don't care about their rituals, Henderson." The comm unit crackled to life again with the harsh voice of some unseen superior. "If ore extraction doesn't return to projected levels by quarter's end, you'll be repairing pumps on that dust bowl personally. Am I clear?" Henderson's face tightened as he clicked off the comm and straightened his uniform, forcing his features into a mask of control before facing the approaching Shen elder. Jake slung his tool belt over his shoulder and moved closer, curious despite himself. As he approached, he caught fragments of their conversation, carried on the hot, still air. "The water is a sacred gift," the elder said, his voice as dry as the cracked earth. "You have broken the treaty." Henderson smirked, adjusting the collar of his pristine corporate uniform. "Treaties change, so does the water level in your well. Wayland Corporation has priority rights to all resources in this sector, including water." Jake winced at Henderson's tone. The man had been on Zyterra for only 3 months, but he embodied the worst of corporate arrogance. Jake had seen it before, on other worlds, other outposts, bureaucrats who viewed local populations as obstacles rather than people. In response to the insult, the elder drew himself up. Despite his age, there was a strength in his bearing that Henderson, for all his corporate backing, could never match. "Then the Shen clan challenges you to the trial by blade," the elder announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "A duel for the right to the spring. The victor takes all." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around them, a profound change swept through the gathered Shen. Warriors struck the butts of their spears against the dry earth in a unified rhythm that sent vibrations through the ground. The women of the clan began a low, undulating hum that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Children were quickly ushered away by attendants, their faces solemn. Jake felt a chill despite the blistering heat. This wasn't merely a challenge. It was a sacred rite, enacted perhaps once in a generation. Even Henderson seemed to sense it, his smirk faltering as the rhythmic pounding intensified. A hushed murmur rippled through the gathered Shen. Jake froze, tool belt halfway to the ground. The trial by blade was an ancient Shen custom, rarely invoked but binding on all parties. He'd heard stories from the longer-serving staff, tales of ritualized combat, of honor and blood. Henderson didn't want a war. War was expensive. Corporate accountants hated expenses that couldn't be justified to shareholders. But he couldn't give up the spring either. Jake watched as Henderson's gaze swept over his few guards, mercenaries mostly, more used to intimidation than actual fighting. And then, with a sinking feeling, Jake saw Henderson's eyes settle on him. A cold, calculating spark lit Henderson's eyes. "We accept the challenge," Henderson said, his voice ringing with false confidence. "The corporation will put forth its champion." He pointed at Jake. Him. The world seemed to slow down around Jake. Him, a mechanic? It was a social trap, perfect in its cruelty. To refuse was to bring shame upon all the humans on the station and likely provoke a massacre. To agree was to walk to certain death. "I'm a mechanic, not a soldier," Jake said quietly, aware of how weak his protest sounded in the suddenly silent yard. "Today you represent humanity, Rowan," Henderson cut him off, his voice hard with finality. "Unless you'd prefer to explain to corporate why we lost access to a critical water source." Henderson leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Besides, if you're so worried about dying, remember your background. Alliance peacekeeping, wasn't it? I've seen your file, Rowan. You know how to handle yourself." Jake stiffened. His military past was something he'd tried to bury as deeply as the red dust of this forsaken planet. The fact that Henderson knew spoke volumes about how closely the corporation tracked its employees. The threat was clear. Jake looked from Henderson to the elder, whose ancient eyes regarded him with neither mercy nor malice, merely assessment. Behind the elder stood a younger Shen warrior, female, her armor glinting in the harsh light. Her ice-colored eyes met Jake's, and he saw in them a fierce pride and barely contained fury. "When?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse. "Now," the elder replied. "The challenge has been issued. The champion has been named. The trial begins." The next hour passed in a blur. Jake was led to a small chamber where a company medic checked him over, pronounced him fit enough, and handed him a standard-issue HFY combat knife. The knife felt strange in his hand. He was used to wrenches and screwdrivers, tools that created rather than destroyed. Yet the weight was familiar, stirring memories he'd fought to suppress. "Any advice?" Jake asked the medic, a worn-looking woman who had been on Terra almost as long as he had. She looked at him, her eyes tired. "Try not to die too quickly. It'll look bad for the company." Before Jake could respond, Henderson appeared in the doorway. "Time, Rowan. Don't embarrass us." Jake was escorted to a circular area of packed earth just outside the corporation's perimeter. A ring of stones marked the boundary of the arena. The Shen had gathered on one side, their sapphire faces impassive. On the other side stood the corporation staff, looking uncomfortable and avoiding Jake's eyes. Jake slowly walked out onto the dusty circle of the arena. In his hand, he gripped his only weapon, the standard-issue HFY combat knife. Opposite him, in the light of the orange star, stood his opponent. The elder introduced her. Liara of the Shen clan, blade of the fifth house, defender of the sacred waters. She was magnificent and terrifying. Her dark metal armor fit her slender, strong body perfectly. In her hands, she held an ancient blade, covered in faint, barely visible runes. Her sapphire face was an impenetrable mask, but in her ice-colored eyes, fury burned. Jake swallowed hard. He was no warrior, but he had grown up in the rough mining colonies of the Outer Rim. He knew how to fight dirty, how to take a punch, how to keep going when everything hurt. It wouldn't be enough against a trained warrior, but it might let him die with some dignity. As he took his position, memories of combat training surfaced unbidden. The weight distribution in his stance adjusted automatically, his grip on the knife shifting to something more tactical than he'd intended. Old instincts, it seemed, didn't die easily. The elder raised his hand, then dropped it, and stepped back from the circle. The fight began without warning. Liara moved with the grace of a predator, her blade a silver blur. Jake barely managed to dodge, feeling the wind of her strike against his cheek. The sound of her blade cutting through air was like a whistle, high and deadly. He stumbled back, raising his knife defensively, the orange sunlight glinting off the metal as dust swirled around their feet. The crowd fell silent. The only sounds were their footfalls on the packed earth, the whisper of Liara's blade through the air, and Jake's increasingly labored breathing. The acrid smell of his own fear sweat mingled with the metallic tang that seemed to emanate from Liara's ancient weapon. Something almost like ozone, suggesting the blade was more than mere metal. Lyra pressed her advantage, driving him back with a series of lightning-fast strikes. Jake didn't try to attack, he was surviving. Every move he made was clumsy but calculated. He analyzed her movements as he would a faulty mechanism, looking for patterns, weak spots, predicting the next step. Inside Liara's mind, rage boiled. Each clumsy evasion by this human was an insult to her years of training, to the sacred ritual they performed. Every second he remained standing was an affront to her people's suffering. His gray coveralls, stained with the same corporate insignia that marked the machines draining their sacred spring, seemed to mock her people's simple garments, woven from local fibers with reverence and care. She saw not just a human, but the embodiment of everything destroying her world. The mining operations that scarred the face of Zyterra. The heavy machinery that stirred up dust storms that choked their children. The indifferent bureaucrats who redrew boundaries on maps with no concern for the sacred sites they desecrated. "Stand and fight, human," Liara snarled, her blade slicing through the air inches from his face. The sunlight cast her shadow long across the arena, her silhouette merging with his as they danced their deadly dance. "I am fighting," Jake gasped, ducking under another strike. "Just not the way you want me to." Liara's eyes narrowed. She changed tactics, moving in a circular pattern, forcing Jake to turn constantly to keep her in view. The sun beat down on them, and sweat poured down Jake's face, stinging his eyes. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation drawing more of the fine dust into his lungs. Their worldviews clashed in short, sharp phrases shouted between strikes. "Your race is a plague, devouring worlds," Liara yelled, her blade striking sparks on the stone at his feet. The metal rang against rock, a discordant note that hung in the still air. "My race builds," Jake roared back, dodging another thrust. "And yours dies, clinging to dead traditions." Each word cut Liara deeper than any blade could. This human understood nothing of her people's ways, nothing of balance, of stewardship, of the sacred covenant between the Shen and Zyterra. Her clan had maintained the same land for 1,000 years without exhausting it. His kind would strip it bare in a decade and move on, leaving only dust and broken promises. Lara's face contorted with rage. She lunged forward in a powerful thrust aimed at Jake's chest. He twisted away, but not fast enough. The tip of her blade sliced through his coverall, leaving a thin line of blood on his ribs. The crowd murmured. First blood had been drawn. Jake circled warily, his breath coming in harsh gasps. He was tiring quickly, while Liara seemed barely winded. He knew he couldn't win by outlasting her. Liara attacked again, her movements a blur of deadly precision. Jake parried desperately, the impact of her blade against his knife sending shocks up his arm. They locked in a clinch, her blade pressing against his knife, both straining for advantage. Her body was hot and tense, his was hard as rock. For a moment, their faces were inches apart. Her silver hair, tied back in intricate warrior braids, had come partially loose, framing her sapphire face. Beads of sweat traced the contours of her features. This close, Jake could see the fine patterns etched into her armor, not decorative but functional, channeling energy in ways human metallurgy hadn't mastered. And in that instant, Jake saw what no one else would have, a micro-fracture on her left pauldron, a vulnerability in her perfect defense. The hairline crack ran along a stress point where the metal had been repeatedly heated and cooled during forging, creating a structural weakness. A mechanic's eye, seeing not just the surface but the engineering beneath. He could have struck. The knife in his hand was ready, a quick thrust under the weakened armor, and the fight would be over. He would live. The corporation would keep its water rights. Henderson would probably even give him a bonus. But then he saw something else in her eyes, not just fury but desperation. The pride of a warrior fighting not for glory, but for her people's survival. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in the eyes of the colonists on Ganymede 7, just before the corporate forces opened fire. The memory hit him like a physical blow. The woman with copper-colored hair, standing in front of the water purifier refusing to move. "This belongs to the settlement," she had said. Jake, still in his Alliance uniform, had watched from the sidelines as the corporate security captain gave the order. "She's a threat to company property." The sound of the plasma rifle still echoed in his nightmares. He hadn't intervened then. He had followed orders, remained silent, told himself it wasn't his fight. The next day, he'd resigned his commission. Now, looking at the vulnerability in Liara's armor, he faced the same choice. And this time, he would make a different decision. Instead, while their blades were crossed, he whispered so only she could hear, "Your left pauldron, it's cracked. The next hit will shatter it." Liara froze. Her ice-colored eyes widened for a fraction of a second in shock. This gesture, this act of honor from a corporate dog, from an enemy, didn't fit her worldview. She had expected anything. Brutality, cunning, but not this. She saw in his eyes not a killer's thirst, but a deadly weariness and unbroken principles. The words penetrated deeper than any blade could have. Honor, from the enemy who should have been seeking her death. Her grip on her sword faltered momentarily. In his eyes, she saw not mockery, but understanding. He too was trapped in this arena, on this planet, though his cage was built of corporate contracts rather than dying traditions. For generations, the Shen had taught their children that humans were devoid of honor, that they understood only profit and exploitation. Yet here was this man, this mechanic, with dust in his hair and blood on his ribs, showing her mercy when he could have claimed victory. She pushed him away, breaking the clinch. The duel resumed, but something had changed. This was no longer an execution. It was a test. She wanted to understand who he was. Her strikes became less furious but more precise, searching not for a gap in his defense, but for a crack in his soul. Jake felt the change. He was no longer just a target. He had become a puzzle she was trying to solve. They were both exhausted, covered in dust and sweat. The arena had become their private world, where only the two of them, their weapons, and unspoken questions existed. "Why did you tell me?" Liara asked during another brief clinch, her voice low, meant only for him. The question carried more weight than the simple words implied. Why would he help her? What kind of human was he? "Because I'm a mechanic," Jake replied, straining against her strength. "I fix things. I don't destroy them." The words were simple, but behind them lay his entire philosophy. The reason he'd left the Alliance, the reason he'd chosen this life of dust and machines. The answer seemed to confuse Liara further. It didn't align with anything she'd been taught about humans, especially corporate humans. They broke apart again. Jake was at his limit. His arms trembled with fatigue, and blood from a dozen minor cuts stained his coveralls. Lara circled him, her movements still precise but lacking the killing intent of earlier. Jake saw in her eyes that she had made a decision. He braced himself for the end. Liara saw her chance, a chance to end the fight without killing him. A sharp, calculated thrust not at his body, but at his hand. She knew this strike would disarm him and end the duel. She lunged, her blade aimed at his palm. The pain was searing as Liara's blade struck true. The edge sliced deep into Jake's palm. The knife fell from his hand with a dull thud into the orange dust. He staggered back, clutching his wounded hand to his chest. But he didn't fall. He stood, swaying slightly, and met Liara's gaze without flinching. Lara stood over him, breathing heavily, her blade pointed at his chest. She had won, but there was no triumph on her face, only confusion, and perhaps a flicker of respect. A drop of Jake's blood fell from his hand and trickled slowly down the blade of her sword, and in that moment everything changed. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. The crowd held its collective breath. Jake stared at his blood on her blade, strangely mesmerized by the crimson droplet as it traveled down the ancient metal. Liara began to lower her weapon, the fight officially over. Then, like the first ember of a forest fire, a single rune near the hilt of the blade began to glow. The light was faint at first, barely noticeable in the harsh sunlight. Then another rune awakened, and another. A low, vibrating hum filled the arena, starting just at the edge of hearing and gradually growing stronger, resonating in their bones. A red light, the color of human blood, raced along the metal, causing the ancient symbols to pulsate like a living heart. The blade, silent for 1,000 years, had awakened. Jake stared in shock. The pain in his hand was forgotten as he watched the transformation of the weapon. The light from the runes cast an eerie glow on Liara's face, turning her sapphire skin to a strange, deep purple. Her eyes, bathed with disbelief, reflected the crimson light like twin moons. Liara stumbled back in horror, dropping the sword. It fell to the ground, but its glow did not fade. It grew brighter, flooding the arena with crimson light. The blade hovered an inch above the dust, spinning slowly in midair, the hum intensifying until it vibrated through their teeth and bones. The clan elder, who had been watching the fight, let out a choked cry and collapsed to his knees. Behind him, like a wave sweeping through the crowd, everyone fell to their knees. Warriors, women, children. The entire Shen clan, hundreds of sapphire-skinned beings, bowed their heads in the dust. Not to Liara, to Jake. He stood alone in the middle of the arena, wounded, disarmed, defeated. And around him an entire people knelt, their silver hair touching the orange earth. The silence was absolute, broken only by the thrumming of the glowing blade. Jake looked around wildly, convinced he was hallucinating from blood loss. But the sight before him didn't waver. Henderson and the other corporation staff stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. On the corporation side of the arena, reactions varied wildly. Some workers dropped to their knees instinctively, mimicking the Shen without understanding why. Others backed away, fear evident in their faces. Henderson stood rigid, his face a mask of calculation as he tried to process what this meant for company interests. The moment of awe didn't last long. Henderson suddenly strode forward, flanked by 2 security officers with hands on their sidearms. "This demonstration is over," he barked, his voice sharp with authority. Rowan returned to the compound immediately. "Your company property." The Shen warriors closest to Jake rose in a single fluid motion, forming a protective circle around him. Liara, recovering from her shock, retrieved her blade from where it floated and took her place at Jake's side, her posture making it clear she would defend him with her life. "He is blood of the first ones," the elder said, rising to his feet with dignity, despite his age. "By our most sacred laws, he is under the protection of the Shen clan." Henderson's face flushed with anger. "Your laws mean nothing to Wayland Corporation. We have a contract with this man. He's coming with us." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a blade. Jake stood between 2 worlds, blood dripping from his hand, head still spinning from the revelation. The corporation security officers' hands tightened on their weapons. "You doubt our words, corporate man?" the elder said, his voice carrying an unexpected strength. "Then witness the truth with your own eyes." The elder gestured to his warriors. "Bring them to the sanctuary. All of them." Under the watchful eyes of the Shen warriors, Jake, Henderson, and a small contingent of corporate personnel were escorted through the Shen settlement. The procession moved in tense silence, the glowing blade carried reverently before them. The sanctuary, carved deep into the bedrock beneath the settlement, was ancient and imposing. The walls were covered in the same runes that adorned Liara's blade, now glowing faintly in the dim light. The air hummed with energy that seemed to intensify as Jake entered. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar. The elder approached it and pressed his hand against a hidden panel. A section of the floor slid open, revealing a small pedestal upon which rested a metallic cube covered in the same runes as the blade. "This artifact has slept for 1,000 years, the elder said, addressing Henderson directly. "No Shen blood has ever awakened it. If you doubt our words, See the truth with your own eyes, he turned to Jake. Blood of the first ones, touch the cube of stars. Jake hesitated, looking from the elder to Henderson to Lyara. The corporate administrator watched with narrowed eyes, skepticism warring with curiosity on his face. Do it, Rowan, Henderson said. Let's see this miracle of theirs. Jake approached the pedestal slowly. His wounded hand had stopped bleeding, but when he flexed his fingers, the cut reopened. He extended his hand over the cube, allowing a single drop of blood to fall upon its surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like the blade before it, the cube began to glow. Lines of light traced the patterns on its surface, pulsing in time with Jake's heartbeat. The cube rose from the pedestal, hovering in the air before him. It began to unfold, sections sliding and rotating in geometric patterns that seemed to defy the properties of solid matter. As it transformed, a soft blue light emanated from its core, filling the chamber with its glow. The light expanded outward, enveloping the entire room, until they stood in what appeared to be the void of space itself. The light coalesced into a three-dimensional projection, a star map of breathtaking detail and complexity. Constellations and planetary systems hung in the air around them, rotating slowly with paths and trajectories marked in glowing lines. At the center, a pulsing red point marked what could only be their current location. From it, a golden line extended outward, crossing vast distances to a blue-white star surrounded by 7 planets. Henderson's jaw dropped. The corporate security officers backed away in awe. Even Lyara and the Elder seemed stunned by the scale and beauty of the projection. The path of return, the Elder whispered, finding his voice first. The sacred texts speak of this, but none living has ever seen it. The map that shows the way to the home of the first ones. Henderson's expression transformed. The shock and disbelief melted away, replaced by something far more dangerous, calculated greed. His eyes darted from the star map to Jake and back again, his mind visibly working through the implications. Do you understand now, corporate man? The Elder asked. Jake Rowan carries the blood of our ancestors, the same blood that flows in the veins of those who came from beyond the stars thousands of years ago, the same blood that is the key to unlocking their legacy. Henderson wasn't listening. His attention was fixed on the map, on the technology that had created it, on the possibilities it represented. Jake could almost see the profit calculations running behind his eyes. The Elder turned to Jake. The prophecy tells us that when the blood of the first ones returns, the sleeping knowledge will awaken. You are the fulfillment of that prophecy, Jake Rowan. Henderson stepped forward and his voice soft but intense. This changes everything, Rowan. Do you realize what we've discovered here? This technology is priceless. Jake felt a chill at Henderson's tone. There was no reverence in it, no awe, only acquisitiveness. You're not just a mechanic anymore, Henderson continued, his voice low enough that only Jake could hear. You're the most valuable asset Wayland Corporation has in the entire galaxy. Jake met Henderson's gaze. I'm not your asset. Henderson's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll see about that. Your contract is still valid, Rowan. And this discovery falls under company jurisdiction. The blood of the first ones is under the protection of the Shen clan, the Elder interrupted, having overheard. Any claim on him is a claim against all of us. Henderson stepped back, his expression smoothing into diplomatic neutrality. Of course, we respect your traditions, but there are protocols for situations like this. The corporation will need to be involved. Jake knew that look. It was the same expression the corporate executives had worn on Ganymede 7 before they called in the security consultants. Henderson was retreating tactically, not surrendering. We should discuss this further, Henderson said with forced pleasantness, after everyone has had time to process these developments. As Henderson and his security team were escorted from the sanctuary, he paused beside Jake. The corporation will be in touch, Jake, he said quietly. Count on it. The implications of the threat hung in the air long after Henderson had gone. Jake looked at the still rotating star map, at the glowing path that stretched across unimaginable distances, and felt the weight of his new reality settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just Jake Rowan, mechanic. He was the key to technology beyond human understanding, the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, and now the target of one of the most powerful corporations in the galaxy. The next few hours passed in a blur for Jake. His hand was treated by Shen healers, wrapped in bandages, infused with herbs that numb the pain, and they assured him would prevent infection. He was given fresh clothing, traditional Shen garments that felt surprisingly comfortable against his skin. Food and drink were brought, though he barely tasted either. As he walked through the settlement, Shen of all ages lined the path, dropping to their knees as he passed. Some reached out tentatively to touch the hem of his dust-covered coveralls as if confirming he was real. Children peered from behind their parents, their ice-colored eyes wide with wonder. Liara walked beside him, no longer his opponent, but his appointed guardian. Her demeanor had completely transformed. The warrior who had tried to kill him hours ago now scanned every shadow for potential threats to his safety, her hand never straying far from her belt knife. "I don't understand any of this," Jake said quietly to her as they walked. "This morning I was just a mechanic fixing a pump. Now I'm some kind of prophesied figure?" Liara's eyes never stopped their vigilant scanning. "The ways of the ancestors are mysterious," she replied, "but the Blade of Awakening does not lie. Your blood carries the essence of the first ones." "But what does that mean?" Jake pressed. "What am I supposed to do now?" Before Liara could answer, they arrived at what appeared to be the central structure of the settlement, a building unlike the others. While most Shen dwellings were simple and functional, this structure was adorned with intricate carvings similar to the runes on the blade. Its entrance was framed by two massive pillars that seemed to be made of the same dark metal as Liara's weapon. As night fell, Jake found himself in the clan's ancient sanctuary, a chamber carved deep into the bedrock beneath the settlement. The walls were covered in the same runes that adorned Liara's blade, now glowing faintly in the dim light. Liara stood beside him, no longer his opponent, but his appointed guardian. She had removed her armor, revealing a simple tunic underneath, but her posture remained rigid, her eyes alert. "You don't have to stand guard," Jake said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the arena. "I'm not going anywhere." Liara's ice-colored eyes flicked to him. "It is my duty and my honor to protect the blood of the first ones," she said formally. Jake sighed, running a hand through his dust-caked hair. "Look, I don't know what's happening here. I'm not some prophesied savior or whatever your people think I am. I'm just a man who happened to have the wrong kind of blood." "The right kind," Liara corrected him. A hint of her earlier ferocity returned to her voice. "The blood that awakens the ancient power. The blood that fulfills the prophecy." "And what exactly does this prophecy say I'm supposed to do?" Jake asked, frustration edging his voice. Before Liara could answer, the elder entered the sanctuary, followed by several other senior members of the clan. They carried with them the blade that had started all this, now placed reverently on a cushion of woven fibers. The elder set the cushion on a stone altar in the center of the room. The blade continued to glow with a soft red light, casting their faces in an eerie crimson hue. "The prophecy speaks of the return," the elder said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "It says that when the blood of the first ones returns, the sleeping knowledge will awaken. The first ones left us, but they promised to return through their blood. Through you, Jake Rowan." As the elder spoke, the runes on the walls seemed to pulse in time with his words, the light strengthening and dimming in a rhythm that matched his cadence. Jake wondered if he was imagining it, or if the chamber itself was somehow responding to the elder's voice, or perhaps to his presence. Jake looked at the glowing blade, then at the expectant faces around him. "I don't have any sleeping knowledge," he said. "I can't help you." The elder's ancient face creased in a smile. "The knowledge is not in your mind, blood of the first ones. It is in the artifacts left by your ancestors. Your blood is the key that unlocks them." He gestured to the blade. "This is but one of many. There are others hidden throughout our lands, devices of power and wonder, sleeping for 1,000 years. Your blood can awaken them all." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. If what the elder said was true, then he had stumbled into something far bigger than a water dispute. The implications were staggering, for the Shen, for humanity, for him. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. "To learn," the elder replied simply, "to help us recover what was lost, to bridge the gulf between your people and ours." The elder moved to a small alcove in the wall that Jake hadn't noticed before. From it, he retrieved a small object, a cube no larger than his palm, made of the same dark metal as the blade. Its surface was covered in intricate patterns that resembled circuit pathways more than decorative engravings. This was found in the ancient temple of Kelshar 5 generations ago, the elder said, holding the cube reverently. Many have tried to activate it. All have failed. He approached Jake and held out the cube. Will you try, blood of the first ones? Jake hesitated, looking from the cube to his bandaged hand. What will happen if it activates? The elder's eyes crinkled at the corners. That is what we wish to learn. With a deep breath, Jake unwrapped the bandage from his hand. The wound was still fresh, blood welling up as soon as the pressure was removed. He reached out and placed his bleeding palm against the cube. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like the blade before it, the cube began to glow. Lines of light traced the patterns on its surface, pulsing in time with Jake's heartbeat. The cube grew warm in his hand, not uncomfortably so, but with a living heat. Suddenly, the cube rose from his palm, hovering in the air before him. It began to unfold, sections sliding and rotating in geometric patterns that seemed to defy the properties of solid matter. As it transformed, a soft blue light emanated from its core, filling the chamber with its glow. The light coalesced into a three-dimensional projection. A star map, Jake realized. Constellations and planetary systems hung in the air, rotating slowly around a central point marked by a pulsing red dot. The elders gasped. Liara's hand flew to her mouth. Even Jake stared in awe at the beauty and complexity of the projection. The path of return, the elder whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. The sacred texts speak of this, but none living has ever seen it. The map that shows the way to the home of the first ones. Jake thought of Henderson, of the corporation, of his contract. 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days on this dusty hell of a planet, fixing broken machinery and counting the days until he could leave. And now this. I need time to think, he said at last. The elder nodded as if he had expected this answer. Of course. Rest now. Tomorrow we will speak again. The elder and the other clan members filed out of the sanctuary, leaving Jake alone with Liara. The cube continued to project its star map, bathing the chamber in ethereal blue light. The constellations rotated slowly, hypnotically, as if beckoning Jake to follow their path. You too, Jake said to Liara. Go get some rest. Liara shook her head. I am bound to you now, she said, by blood oath and ancient law. Where you go, I go, until the end. Jake wanted to argue, but exhaustion swept over him like a wave. The events of the day, the duel, the revelation, the complete upending of his life, caught up with him all at once. He sank down onto a bench carved from the bedrock, his legs suddenly unable to support him. Fine, he said, stay if you want, but I'm going to sleep. Liara nodded, taking up a position by the door. Sleep, Jake Rowan. I will watch over you. Jake stretched out on the bench, which was surprisingly comfortable despite being made of stone. His last thought before sleep claimed him was that he should be more worried, more afraid of what had happened and what might come next. But instead, he felt a strange sense of peace, as if after years of drifting, he had finally found an anchor. He woke to the sound of raised voices. Sitting up, he saw Liara standing at the sanctuary entrance, her posture tense, one hand on the hilt of a knife at her belt. Beyond her in the corridor, he could hear Henderson's voice, strident and demanding. This is a corporation employee. You have no right to hold him. This is kidnapping, and the corporation will not stand for it. Jake got to his feet, wincing at the stiffness in his muscles. The events of the previous day came rushing back. The duel, the glowing blade, the revelation of his connection to the first ones. The star map projection from the cube had vanished, but the cube itself sat inert on the altar beside the still glowing blade. Let him in, Jake said to Liara. She turned to him, her ice-colored eyes narrowed. He threatens you. He's just doing his job, Jake replied, and I need to talk to him. Liara hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing Henderson to enter the sanctuary. The station chief looked disheveled, his pristine uniform stained with dust, his face flushed with anger. Behind him stood 2 corporate security officers, their hands hovering near their sidearms. Rowan, he said, ignoring Liara's glare. This has gone far enough. You're coming back to the complex now. Jake met Henderson's gaze steadily. I don't think that's going to happen. Henderson's face darkened. You have a contract, Rowan. The corporation doesn't look kindly on employees who break their contracts. The corporation doesn't look kindly on anything that doesn't increase profits, Jake replied. But things have changed. I've changed. Henderson's eyes flicked to the glowing blade on the altar, then back to Jake. This is some primitive superstition, nothing more. You can't seriously believe. I believe what I saw, Jake cut him off. What we all saw. And I think you do too, or you wouldn't be here trying to get me back. Henderson's jaw tightened. The corporation has invested significant resources in this operation. We can't simply abandon it because the locals think you are some kind of a messiah. Jake smiled without humor. Then don't abandon it. But you'll have to deal with me now, not just the clan elder, and I want changes. What kind of changes? Henderson asked warily. A new water agreement for starters, Jake said. One that respects the Shen's needs as well as the corporation's, and better treatment for the workers, both human and Shen. Henderson laughed incredulously. You're in no position to make demands, Rowan. Jake looked at Liara, then at the glowing blade. I think I am, he said quietly. The question is, are you smart enough to recognize it? Henderson's face worked as he struggled with his anger. Behind him, the security officers exchanged nervous glances. They had witnessed the events in the arena, had seen the blade glow and the Shen kneel. They knew something extraordinary had happened, something beyond corporate protocols. The corporation has protocols for first contact scenarios, Jake continued, pressing his advantage. I think this qualifies. And those protocols include respect for indigenous cultural artifacts and cooperation with local authorities. Henderson's eyes narrowed. You've read the protocols? Alliance peacekeeping required it, Jake replied. And I think you know what happens to administrators who violate them. Career-ending inquiries, at minimum. The threat hung in the air between them. Henderson might be able to bully local employees, but corporate oversight was another matter. If this situation escalated to that level, Henderson would be the first sacrifice on the altar of public relations. Finally, he said, I'll take your suggestions back to the corporation. But don't expect miracles, Rowan. That's exactly what I expect, Jake replied. And call me Jake. I think we're beyond formalities now. After Henderson left, escorted by Shen warriors who made no effort to hide their distrust, Jake turned to Liara. I need to understand more, he said, about the first ones, about the prophecy, about what my blood means to your people. Liara nodded, her face solemn. The elder has called a gathering. All will be explained. The gathering took place in the central plaza of the Shen settlement, around the nearly dry well that had been the source of the conflict. The entire clan was present, hundreds of sapphire-skinned beings with silver hair, all watching Jake with a mixture of awe and hope that made him deeply uncomfortable. The well itself had been transformed overnight. It was now surrounded by a circle of stones inscribed with the same runes as the blade. In the center, the water level had visibly risen, though whether through natural means or something more mystical, Jake couldn't tell. As he approached with Liara at his side, the crowd parted, creating a path to the center. Many reached out as he passed, their fingers brushing his coveralls with reverent touches. Children stared wide-eyed, some being hushed by parents when they pointed or asked questions too loudly. The elder stood before them, the glowing blade held reverently in his hands. Behind him stood a semicircle of other elders, their faces grave and expectant. The cube that had projected the star map was also there, resting on a small pedestal. When Jake reached the center, a hush fell over the gathering. The only sounds were the soft hum of the blade and the whisper of the dry wind across the settlement. The elders spoke of the first ones, of their arrival on Zyterra thousands of years ago, of the wonders they had brought and the knowledge they had shared. They came from beyond the stars, the elder said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. They reshaped our world, taught us the ways of metal and fire, of writing and building. They lived among us, and some took Shen mates. But then, for reasons known only to them, they left. They promised to return one day through their blood. As the elder spoke, Jake noticed something extraordinary. The runes on the blade began to pulse in rhythm with the elder's words, as if responding to the ancient tale. The light they cast grew stronger, illuminating the elder's face with an otherworldly glow despite the bright daylight. The elder held up the blade, its red glow pulsing in the shadow of the plaza. They left us these artifacts, these tools of power. But after their departure, the knowledge of how to use them faded. The blades slept, the devices fell silent. We became keepers of relics we no longer understood. Jake listened, fascinated despite his skepticism. The Elder's tale suggested that the first ones were humans, or perhaps the ancestors of humans who had visited Zyterra in the distant past. It was a tale of ancient astronauts, the kind of story that had been told on Earth for centuries, never taken seriously by mainstream science. But the glowing blade was real. Its response to his blood was real. The star map projected by the cube was real. Whatever the full truth might be, there was something to the Elder's tale. The prophecy tells us that when the blood of the first ones returns, the sleeping knowledge will awaken, the Elder continued. The lost will be found, the broken will be mended, and our people will rise again to touch the stars. He turned to Jake, his ancient eyes bright with emotion. You are the fulfillment of that prophecy, Jake Rowan. Your blood has awakened the blade. It can awaken all the sleeping relics of the first ones. With your help, we can reclaim our heritage. Jake felt the weight of hundreds of expectant gazes. He was no savior, no chosen one. He was a mechanic, a man who fixed broken machines. But perhaps that was exactly what the Shen needed. Someone to help them understand and repair the ancient technology left by the first ones. He looked down at his bandaged hand, then at the faces surrounding him, faces filled with hope and reverence. He thought of his original plan: finish his contract, buy a ship, disappear into the vastness of space, a life of solitude and escape, a life of running from his past. Now fate or coincidence had given him something else, a purpose, a connection, a chance to build rather than merely repair. I'll help you, he said, his voice carrying across the silent plaza. Not because of any prophecy, but because it's the right thing to do. Because your people and mine should be working together, not fighting over resources. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. The Elder smiled, his ancient face creasing with joy. Then let us begin, he said. There is much to learn and much to do. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Jake was shown other artifacts of the first ones, devices of metal and crystal, covered in the same runes as the blade, all dormant until touched by his blood. Some responded with light, others with sound, still others in ways he couldn't begin to understand. One, a spherical device no larger than his fist, projected detailed holograms of Zyterra as it had been thousands of years ago. Lush and green, with vast oceans and flourishing cities. Another, a slender rod of the same dark metal as the blade, could apparently alter the molecular structure of matter, turning rock to liquid and back again with a touch. With each new discovery, Jake's skepticism eroded further. These were not simple relics or religious artifacts. They were advanced technology, far beyond anything humanity had developed. If the Shen legends were true, if these devices had been left by starfaring ancestors, then the implications for human history were staggering. Lyara remained by his side, his guardian and guide. She introduced him to the Shen way of life, to their customs and beliefs. She watched with barely concealed amazement as his blood awakened artifact after artifact. She was different now, no longer the fierce warrior who had tried to kill him in the arena. There was a softness to her that emerged gradually, a curiosity about him and his world that matched his curiosity about hers. When they weren't studying artifacts, she taught him the Shen language, with its complex tonal patterns and flowing script that resembled the runes on the artifacts. In turn, he shared stories of Earth and the colonies, of the stars he had visited, and the wonders of human technology. She was particularly fascinated by his descriptions of the great space stations that orbited gas giants, harvesting fuel for interstellar ships. How does it feel, she asked him once, as they sat beside a newly awakened device that hummed with power and projected strange shifting patterns of light onto the walls of the sanctuary. Outside, the orange star was setting, casting long shadows across the settlement. Jake considered the question. Strange, he admitted. I've spent my life fixing machines made by human hands. Now I'm activating machines made by, what? My ancestors? Some advanced civilization that visited your world thousands of years ago? It's a lot to take in. Lyara nodded, her ice-colored eyes reflecting the shifting patterns of light. For my people as well, she said. We have lived with these relics for generations, telling stories of the first ones, waiting for the prophecy to be fulfilled. And now that it has, she trailed off, her face troubled. Now you're not sure what happens next, Jake finished for her. Yes, she said simply. The prophecy speaks of awakening, of return, of rising again to touch the stars. But it does not tell us how. Jake looked at the glowing device. That's where I come in, I guess, he said. I'm a mechanic. I figure out how things work, how to fix them when they're broken. If these devices are machines, I can learn to understand them. Liara turned to him, her face solemn. And if they are more than machines? Jake didn't have an answer for that. Meanwhile, negotiations with the corporation continued. Henderson, backed by his superiors, tried to assert control over Jake and the artifacts, claiming them as corporate discoveries. But the Shen were adamant. Jake was under their protection and the artifacts were their heritage. Corporate shuttles began arriving, bringing scientists and executives eager to study the phenomena. They brought equipment, scanning devices, and offers of partnership that thinly disguised their desire to exploit the discovery. Jake found himself in the unfamiliar role of diplomat, navigating the complex currents between corporate greed and Shen tradition. During one particularly tense meeting in the Shen sanctuary, a corporate executive named Winters, a sharp-faced woman with calculating eyes, proposed placing the artifacts in a secure research facility off-planet. These devices clearly represent technology far beyond our current capabilities, she argued. Proper study requires specialized equipment that can only be found in corporate laboratories. The elder seated across from her remained unmoved. The artifacts stay with the Shen, he said. They are our heritage left by our ancestors. Your ancestors? Winters said with a thin smile. Or Rowan's. If these first ones were human, as seems likely, then the artifacts could be considered human heritage. Jake, who had been listening silently, leaned forward. If they were human, then they chose to leave these devices with the Shen, he said. And they encoded them to respond only to specific genetic markers, markers that happen to survive in my bloodline. That suggests they intended a collaboration, not ownership by either side. Jake, who had been listening silently, leaned forward. If they were human, then they chose to leave these devices with the Shen, he said, and they encoded them to respond only to specific genetic markers, markers that happen to survive in my bloodline. That suggests they intended a collaboration, not ownership by either side. Winter's eyes narrowed, but she couldn't refute his logic. The corporation is prepared to offer substantial compensation for exclusive research rights, she tried instead. The artifacts belong to the Shen, Jake repeated firmly. I'll help activate them, and I'll help understand them, but I won't help exploit them. In the end, a compromise was reached. The corporation would provide resources and technical support for the study of the artifacts, in exchange for access to any knowledge or technology that resulted. The Shen would retain ownership of the artifacts themselves and control over how they were used. As for Jake, he found himself in a unique position. No longer just a corporate mechanic, not quite the messiah the Shen saw him as, but something in between. A bridge between two worlds, much like the first ones had been thousands of years ago. The Wayland Corporation, recognizing the potential value of his unique status, offered him a new contract, not as a mechanic, but as a cultural and technological liaison. The salary was 10 times what he'd been making, with provisions for his continued residence among the Shen. Jake accepted, but with his own conditions. Primary among them was a comprehensive water-sharing agreement that respected the Shen's needs and traditions. The nearly dry well that had sparked the conflict would be supplemented by corporation technology, not to extract more, but to purify and recycle what was available. As the negotiations concluded and the official documents were signed, Henderson approached Jake privately. You could have asked for anything, he said, his tone a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. A seat on the board. Your own research division. Instead, you negotiated for water rights for the locals. Jake looked at the man who had so callously thrown him into the arena to die. Some things matter more than money or power, he said simply. Henderson shook his head. I'll never understand you, Rowan. That makes two of us, Jake replied with a wry smile. One evening, as the orange star sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the Shen settlement, Jake sat with Liara on a ridge overlooking the valley. The air was cooler here, the constant dust less oppressive. "I never thought I'd end up like this," Jake said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "When I signed up for this contract, I just wanted to make enough credits to buy my own ship, maybe start a salvage business. Now," he gestured vaguely at the settlement below, at the corporation complex in the distance, at the vastness of Cyterra stretching to the horizon. In the valley below, the changes were already visible. Corporation engineers worked alongside Shen laborers, installing water purification systems. The well at the center of the settlement now flowed freely, its waters clean and plentiful. Children played in the plaza where once warriors had stood watch. And in the sanctuary beneath the settlement, a team of human scientists and Shen scholars studied the awakened artifacts, cataloging their functions, deciphering the runes that covered them. Each day brought new discoveries, new insights into the past and possibilities for the future. But among these positive developments, Jake noticed other changes. Corporate security personnel had doubled around the perimeter. Survey teams were mapping the entire region. Cargo shuttles arrived daily, bringing equipment and personnel whose purpose wasn't always clear. Henderson had kept his word. The corporation had sent representatives to negotiate a new water agreement, one that respected the Shen's needs. But Jake knew it wasn't altruism. They were establishing a presence, integrating themselves into the situation, positioning for the moment when they could make their real move. Liara followed his gaze. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Jake considered the question. "No," he said finally. "I was drifting before, fixing other people's machines, moving from one contract to the next. Now I have a purpose, something that matters." "The prophecy," Liara nodded. "Not just the prophecy," Jake corrected her. "Helping your people, understanding the artifacts, building a bridge between humans and the Shen. That's what matters." He looked at her profile against the sunset, her silver hair catching the last rays of the orange star, her sapphire skin deepening to indigo in the fading light. In the weeks since the duel, they had moved from enemies to reluctant allies to something else, something neither of them had names for yet. But that grew stronger with each passing day. Liara turned to him, her ice-colored eyes serious. "And when it is done, when the sleeping knowledge is awakened and the prophecy fulfilled, what then?" Jake smiled. "Then we see what comes next. Together." In the distance, a corporate shuttle lifted off, its engines burning bright against the darkening sky. Henderson was on that shuttle, Jake knew, returning to the regional headquarters with reports and data, planning, calculating. The corporation wouldn't give up easily on the greatest archaeological and technological discovery in human history. As the last light faded from the sky, they sat in silence, watching the first stars appear. Somewhere out there, Jake thought, were the answers to the questions that had been raised by the glowing blade and his blood's response to it. Somewhere out there was the true home of the first ones, the ancestors whose blood flowed in his veins. The star map from the cube had shown a path, a journey spanning light years to a system far beyond the current reach of human exploration. Was that where the first ones had gone? Was that where they still waited, perhaps, for their descendants to find them? Liara leaned slightly against his shoulder, her warmth a contrast to the cooling evening air. Before them, the stars seemed to multiply as darkness deepened, until the sky was a tapestry of light. Jake found himself searching for patterns, wondering if any of those distant points matched the map they had discovered. "Do you think we'll ever follow them?" Liara asked softly, her eyes on the same stars. "The first ones. Do you think we'll ever travel the path they left for us?" Jake reached out, taking her hand in his. Their fingers intertwined, sapphire and tan, alien and human, yet somehow belonging together. "I think that's what they hoped for," he said. "Why else leave a map? Why else encode their technology to respond to blood that bridges our worlds?" He looked down at their joined hands, then back at the stars. "Whatever else the prophecy means, I think it's about unity, about bringing together what was separated. The Shen and humans, working together to rediscover what the first ones knew." Liara's fingers tightened around his. "Then perhaps that is our destiny, not just to reclaim the past, but to create a new future. Together." In the pocket of his new Shen garments, Jake's corporate communicator vibrated softly. Henderson, no doubt, with more questions, more demands, more thinly veiled threats. The corporation's shadow stretched long across their future. But looking at the stars above and feeling Liara's hand in his, Jake found he wasn't afraid. Whatever challenges lay ahead, corporate greed, ancient mysteries, or the long journey to the stars, they would face them together. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was blood of the first ones, and his journey was just beginning.